All right, continuing on with my horror library, let's start talking about Stephen King. I don't talk about Stephen King a lot on this channel. I did make one video where I talked about why that is, why I find it hard to talk about Stephen King, and I'll link that down in the description, but just a really quick version of that is Stephen King was the first author I ever really fell in love with. I read his stuff voraciously from like the age of 9 all the way up to the age of 19, through really my formative years. He's what made me fall in love with the concept of being a writer, so there's a lot of nostalgia there, and that makes it very hard to talk about. Plus, I'm not abnormal in that. Many people had the same experience with Stephen King that I did, so a lot of people have talked about Stephen King already and really broken down his work in ways that I find are absolutely wonderful. So it feels kind of strange to do it, but I am going to talk about it in this little bit of a library tour of my Stephen King collection. And a lot of these I have read, especially the early Stephen King, so usually I just show all the books and kind of move on from there. This time I'm going to take a little bit longer on each book and just kind of express my connection to it as we go along. So, all right, let's get started. I'm going to do these in publication order, but not completely, in the sense that I'm going to talk about the Bachman books when it comes up, because I never had the Bachman books separated. So if we're following publication order, Rage should come pretty soon at the beginning here, and it's not going to. I'm going to save those for the Bachman books. So, all right, here we go. The first book in my Stephen King library is, of course, Carrie. And this is a first book club edition. It's not a first. I can't afford the first, although I've seen one and I've held one in my hands. And it was really a wonderful experience. And really, truly, it looks exactly like this. Just has some different markings. So I don't really mind having the book club, especially when they're books that are this expensive. Who did the jacket art? The jacket is by Alex Gottfried. I think I said his name right. And is a jacket I honestly didn't really see a lot when I was growing up. In fact, when I first looked up the first edition of Carrie, which was when I was an adult, much later in my Stephen King loving days, I had never seen this jacket. This was a new jacket to me. The one I always saw was the paperback one, of course. The first, I think was it Signet that did the first paperback? Anyway, that first paperback edition of Carrie is the one that I'm most familiar with. For a while, I was such an in-depth Stephen King collector that I actually had all the paperback first editions as well. But I eventually ran out of room. Room is something that I'm always looking for and working on in the library, so I had to get rid of my first editions of the paperbacks. I did keep just a couple because they were so important to me, but truly I got rid of all of them but two, and you'll see one of them as I go along here. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Carrie. I believe this is the second Stephen King book I ever read. I read Cujo first, and this was my second read. So I was young. I don't think I was a teenager yet when I read Carrie, but I felt like I was the perfect age when I read it. And this still stands, in my opinion, as one of my favorite Stephen King novels. And of course, it has a fantastic movie, which I think this book and this movie really is what launched Stephen King's career. So for me, what drew me in with this book and why I love it so much, and I've read it again recently, when I was a kid, first off, it was written about people that were my age or becoming, or the age I was going to be soon. I think I read it when I was in middle school, and this was about high schoolers, but I felt like they were people that I could connect to, and that really helped me love it. Also, I think this book taught me more about bullying than any of the adults in my life. Not to say that the adults in my life were neglecting teaching that lesson. I don't know if that was a lesson that was taught as much. I feel like growing up in the 80s, there was a lot less focus on the concept of bullying. It was just kind of expected, something that somebody would have to deal with. Yeah, it was just a different ideology, right? So, yeah, this book, I think, really had a huge impact on my life, especially in consideration of bullying, because after this book, every time I think something was funny that somebody else was doing, when I would giggle or laugh or think about making a joke, Carrie White would come into my brain. And I think that, this book really has an incredible lesson. And I think that it's a good one. And it's funny because I think in a very interesting way, it's similar to Rage, which I think Stephen King had already written by the point that he started writing Carrie. He had already written Rage, or at least a large chunk of it. This concept of precocious high school youth that for some reason, in Carrie White's case, has power, or in Rage, the person feels, like I said, precocious, smarter, or wiser than the people around him, which is not the case. But yeah, these outcasts that are finding a way to punish the people around them. In Carrie's case, I think we're supposed to really see her as, in a weird way, a hero, an anti-hero, right? I mean, it's awful. She's the bad guy. She's the bad guy in the story. But I didn't read it that way as a kid. I don't know how to explain it. I think Rage is also has a little bit of that, which is why Stephen King might have started pushing against that book specifically. I haven't read Rage as an adult, so all of my concepts of Rage are from dim memories of that book. I don't remember how much Stephen King makes that guy the bad guy. Of course, he is the bad guy. He does terrible things, but I can't remember if Stephen King wrote him like he did Carrie. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, Carrie taught me a bunch about bullying. Also, I was young enough that I had huge crushes on characters in novels. I did a lot of that, and Carrie was one of those. And I, in my little pride, I felt like if I went to that school, I would have befriended Carrie White, so I could have fantasies about being a stand-up guy and so on and so forth. That was one aspect of it. It was written about people that were about my age. It told really strong truths about what high school felt like, and I was in middle school at the time, but what it felt like to be in school at that time. And it had the religious aspect. Now, I grew up in a very religious place. I grew up Mormon in Utah, and my parents were nothing like Carrie White's mother, but there was close to that all around me growing up. So religion was the concept of religion, not being religious, but the concept of religion was a very important topic to me. I thought about it a lot, especially when we moved away from Utah and really weren't Mormon anymore at all. It was something that I wrestled with and thought about, and I looked at all kinds of different religions, and I looked at the way that religion can lift people up or harm people. And when I was young, I was way interested in how much it could harm people. And I'm not a religious person now, but I was wrestling with that at the time, and this was the perfect novel for that. I know that Stephen King, this was a real challenge for him because it was writing about a feminine character, which he hadn't really done before. I think he had Rage, and I think there's another novel that was never a fantasy novel. He had written Rage and a fantasy novel before this one, and I'm sure he'd written a bunch of short stories, but this one really challenged him. And of course, there's the popular story that he threw it in the trash, the beginning of it, and his wife Tabitha pulled it out of the trash and said, "Hey, I want you to keep writing this. This is awesome, and if you have any questions," because it felt inappropriate to him to be writing from a woman's perspective like he was in Carrie. And she said, "Yeah, I will, if you need any," she kind of helped him develop the character of Carrie, and it's freaking awesome. Of course, Tabitha is a writer in her own right. So, yeah, Carrie is one of my top Stephen Kings. I think it's an absolutely fantastic novel. Plus, if somebody asks, which Stephen King novel should I start with? I know a lot of people think like It, The Shining, The Stand. The problem with all of those is they are insanely long. And back in the day, the longer the better for me. But now I find that I like my books a little bit thinner. I do. And this one I feel is a perfect entryway into Stephen King. It's just the right size to get a taste of Stephen King and decide if you want to read more. And I think if you read this one, you absolutely will want to read more Stephen King. Next we have Salem's Lot. And of course the story behind this one is, I think he was teaching Dracula to students in school, and I can't remember if he said it was him or Tabitha. One of them came up with the idea of, wouldn't it be interesting if Dracula came to a town in modern times? How would Dracula be told in modern times? And then either he or Tabitha, I don't remember which, talked about, wouldn't it be interesting if he came to a rural town? So one idea was one idea was the others, and Salem's Lot was born. I have a strange relationship with this book, and I'm going to say what I thought of it as a teenager. But before you go and eviscerate me in the comments because of what I'm about to say, please know that the end of this story is me reading it recently and changing my mind about it. So, when I was young, this was probably my least favorite Stephen King book. And I've thought a lot about the reasons why. When I was a kid, I was interested in... It's funny because I think, in a weird way, I was interested in liminality before I knew even what the term meant. But I loved going to the small town where my mom grew up and where my grandparents lived. And I would go out and explore what seemed like massive amounts of land that had barns and old granaries and all this stuff on them. And that's what I was looking for in my fiction. It's what I've always looked for in my writing, and it's what I was looking for in my fiction. And it's funny because you're probably thinking right now, the Marston House, dude. When I read this as a kid, the vampires in this story were the old-fashioned zombies more than they were vampires. And I will say now, this is another unpopular opinion that I have. Zombies were my least favorite monster when I was a kid. Least favorite. And vampires weren't far behind. I did love werewolves. I thought werewolves were just cool as hell. And then I liked stuff like Freddy, really unique kind of creative monsters. But I did not like zombies and vampires. And for me, this turned into what I felt like at the time was kind of a zombie story more than a vampire story. I think that's the best way that I can explain it. And that, for me as a kid, didn't hold the same kind of coolness as, say, The Shining did. And I think I read this after The Shining. The Shining felt like this darkness and liminal places, which, yeah, okay. So I reread it recently. I did a reread. Before the channel, I reread Carrie, I reread Salem's Lot, and I reread The Shining. That's as far as I got in my Stephen King rereads. And then I started the channel and stopped doing the rereads, although I did do The Shining on the channel. I'll link that in the description as well. So when I reread this, I enjoyed it immensely. This is a great novel, and the Marston House is absolutely incredible. I didn't remember the Marston House at all from my read as a teenager. And the vampires are still kind of zombie-ish, but I feel like this was not about the vampires as much as it was about... I mean, like, this was the first real foray Stephen King had into his small town horror storytelling, which became so popular. This is the first run of it, and it was really, really incredible. I had a really good time on the read through and had to realize that my teenage self was wrong. Not about what monsters I loved, because that's just, opinion, depending on what monsters you're into. But because of how well this was written, I still wouldn't put it above Carrie, but I do think it's a very, very good book. And the Marston house is like one of the scariest houses in Stephen King. The other one I can think of is in It, and I can't remember what the name of that house was. Oh, just last thought on Salem's Lot that I forgot to do. This is a book club edition, not a first edition. I've never seen or held an actual Salem's Lot first edition, but I assume, like Carrie, that it is very similar to the actual first edition. All right, next came The Shining. And this is the first actual first edition I have in my library, in my Stephen King library. And that is, of course, it says TS and is $8.95 on the cover flap. It says first edition on the cover page. And, of course, in the very back gutter code, it says R49, which are the 3 points that you need to actually have a first edition. So yeah, this is very cool. It is not the most expensive book in my overall library, but it is in the top 10. Not in perfect condition. The dust jacket has seen water and some ripping, but the book itself is not warped, but it's also not in lovely condition. Again, for all 3 of these, I was way more used to the old covers than I am these, the newer covers for me in the late 80s, early 90s. So I was used to the different Salem's Lot cover with the vampire face on it. And I did have that first edition that was all just black with the one red drop, but I sold it and kept this one. And The Shining, of course, I remember most the silver cover with the Danny's face, but it's completely blank with just the hair. But I'm very happy to have this Shining first edition, and this I think I put it as my top horror book, and the last time I did a horror top 10, which is, it's been a while since I've done one of those. Maybe I need to do one of those again. Yeah, I absolutely love The Shining. I've done a deep dive of it where I went to the Stanley Hotel, and with my brother Jason and I looked around the Stanley Hotel. That's linked in the description again. This book, to me, embodied everything that I loved about horror. This is creepy spaces that nobody uses anymore, these liminal places that people walk into and unearth these what could be ghosts or could be memories. Like, this was the perfect horror book for me. It was really, really incredible. I absolutely loved it. I loved the way that the shine was portrayed in this. It was kind of a superpower, but not so much. I mean, the telepathy at the beginning was pretty, it's okay. That wasn't my favorite part, but just this idea that some people are more attuned to be able to see past the veil of reality and into the worlds beyond was really interesting to me. But the scares in this were absolutely incredible. What a scary hotel, truly. Just a classic Stephen King book, one of the best. Of course, right after this, Rage comes out, but we'll talk about that when we get to the Bachman books. Of course, it wasn't under his name.